Jason Tanner, protege of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., has been by his mentor's side in New York to spread the message of passive resistance. In Harlem, the epicenter of Black culture, poet Anita Hopkins tries to capture the message of Malcolm X, which she believes with all her heart. The time is now. Enough is enough. When Jason goes to the iconic B-flat lounge and sees Anita perform, he's transfixed. Her passion for what she does runs as deep as his. And Anita has never met anyone who could match her wit for wit like this. Confessions in B-flat, a novel by USA Today bestselling author Donna Hill. Download your copy today, wherever books are sold. A Reader's Paradise podcast, featuring interviews with celebrity authors, audiobook narrators, and readers just like you. So, kick off your shoes, bring your glass of wine, and join us on the beach for some fun, great stories, and literary laughter. Hello, and welcome to another edition of A Reader's Paradise. Say, if you like the author interviews and the literature that gets performed for you, please leave us a rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts. Your ratings and reviews help others to find the show. Also, stick around for the end of the show so that you can hear an excerpt from my audio drama Manhunt and Lenny Gray. You will definitely not want to miss those two excerpts. Okay, with that being said, folks, today we have a USA Today best-selling author, and her name is Donna Hill. Donna, welcome to the show.
Hey, Earl. Thank you. How are you?
I am doing good, and it's good to hear you. Good to hear you, and I'm so glad you're here. For those of you who are listening, I have to admit that Donna and I have known each other for quite some time now. And, you know, part of Donna's story is that she went back to Goddard College up in the Vermont area here in the United States, and she went and got her Master's of Creative Writing degree from there. And she also teaches. And so when I was actually looking to do the same thing, Donna recommended that I go through their writing program at that same college, and I did and got my master's from there. So we are actually alumni from the same university. But with that being said, Donna, why don't you tell more of your story?
Oh gosh, where do I even begin? Earl, it's been so long. And if I start telling my story, it's going to age me, but that's cool too. So, I started off as a writing for the Confession magazines.
Common too. I'm sorry. We have that in common too. I was started off writing for them too. Like True Confessions and Black Confessions or something like that. Yes.
So, that was my foray into being, a published paid writer, because, they paid us a few little dollars to write those stories. And I was doing that for a couple of years. And the editor at the time, Nastasia Brooks Harris, she said that my stories were getting to be a little too long and complicated for the audience, and I should think about writing a book. So, in my mind, I was like, wait a second, how am I going to get from, these little 12, 15 pages, to a full-length novel? And, she was very insistent and very supportive. And I started working on this book, and she took me to my very first writers' conference in New York. This was about 1988, 89. And I met with one of the editors who had read my excerpt in advance. And so we're having a conversation, how you go to these writers' conferences and you meet up with editors and, you pitch your story, et cetera. So that's what was going down. And, she said that it was a good story and maybe I might want to soften up my heroine a little bit. I don't know, whatever that's supposed to mean. And then she asked me if my characters had to be Black. And I was like, yeah, I guess. Why wouldn't they be? Because like one of the first things that you learn when you start writing is write about what you know, right? So I figured I know a little bit about being a woman and being Black, right? So I told her, I said, well, yeah. So she says, well, I'm not trying to tell you to change it or anything, but if you do, I'd be happy to take a look at it again. So I was totally thrown, into a tizzy about that, because my belief was that the reason why I wasn't seeing, books, romantic stories with Black characters was because people weren't writing them. But in fact, it was the fact that the publishing industry was just not interested in publishing them. So as I said, this was like 1989, and this was in Manhattan, sort of like, the hub of intellectualism or whatever. And this is what people were still feeling. So fast forward, I decided that I was going to just kind of keep looking. And I found a publisher, Odyssey Books, from reading. I was reading a magazine. And in the back of the magazine, it had one of those, classified ads. And Odyssey Books was looking for Black romances. And I was like, oh, well, that's me. And I sent off my story. And at the time, I think I probably had like maybe the first 5 chapters written. So I submitted it, and I get a letter back, a couple of weeks later or whatever. And they said they're very interested in publishing my story, and please send in the rest. But I'd never finished the book because I just didn't think that anything was going to happen with it. So, being the fiction writer that I am, I just made up a story to tell Letitia Peoples, well, I'm not really satisfied with, how it's going so far, and I'm going to be making some changes and blah, blah, blah. And so I sent off this note, and, back then everything, was letters. So, I had to send off a letter. And so I'm feverishly working on this book, back and forth every day on the train, going back and forth to work. And I finally finished it. I sent it in, and it was published by Odyssey Books. It was the first book out of their contemporary line. It launched their company, along with author Mildred Riley, who wrote a historical. So those were the first two books that came out of Odyssey, and that was in 1990. So that book was Rooms of the Heart, and it celebrated its 30th anniversary this past June. And I've been writing consistently ever since, 1 to 2, sometimes more novels per year. I've contributed to like countless anthologies, put together collections of edited collections, packaged different anthologies myself. So it's been a whirlwind. I mean, I never expected when I started writing that little short story, in 1989, that I would be where I am now. I've written for Harlequin, I'm still with. I've written for St. Martin's, Kensington, BET, the whole gamut. And I've had a wonderful experience. And I'm currently writing with Entangled Publishing, which published my most recent book, Confessions in B Flat.
Wow, that is quite a story. You know what? Of course, in 1989, I wasn't born yet. Wink, wink.
Yeah, right.
I wasn't even a gleam in my daddy's eye.
And I was only 12.
Yeah, okay. So, it's funny because in 1989, I was, wanting to be a writer, or I thought I would be a writer, but I was writing and, nothing was happening. In fact, it would be another decade before I would get anything published.
Yeah. Yeah.
My daughter was born in 94, and then I stopped writing for a while, but then I started again. Yeah, it was about another decade before I published anything. But with that being said, Since you've been, in the game for a while, what have been some of the biggest changes in the industry that you notice? And are those changes good changes or not so good changes?
Well, the biggest change is our visibility on the shelves, of course. When Rooms with a Heart came out, I think there was something like less than a half dozen Black romance novels that had ever been published, like ever, period. And so when my book came out, as a side note, the publisher couldn't get the book in the stores. They didn't have a distributor. Nobody wanted to distribute these books. And I kind of was sort of like almost like a self-published writer. I found all of the bookstores that I could locate in New York. I went in person with my book in my hand and, let them take books on consignment. And ultimately, we found a distributor by accident, Lucina Books, who actually began distributing the books and getting them into bookstores. So from there, the struggle has continued in terms of, getting our books noticed. We very often, especially romance writers, our books were sort of segregated from the rest of the romance rack. You see rows and rows of romances, and they would put our book in Black interest. And so if you were a romance reader, you would go to the romance section, but you wouldn't be able to find our book. So it was a concerted effort among, the Black romance writers to really lobby, for inclusion. And eventually, we got, put on the shelves with everyone else. And, even today, you still see, the Black section of the store. It's just like, if Nora Roberts writes a book with, Irish characters, her book gets put in the Irish section of the store. Of course not. So, we still have that, that we fight against, getting recognized and, getting paid our worth. But I think that, the doors that were opened by Odyssey and then with Kensington, when they launched Arabesque, actually paved the way for so many of the writers that are able to write today. And that was because of romance writers kind of taking that lead. And when publishing sort of realized, wow, Black people actually read books, and they will buy books. And, maybe we should jump on this bandwagon. And so then you see publishing houses having these Black imprints and, things like that. So those are the things that, I've seen change over the years. It's gotten better. It's not as good as it could be. We're still sort of some sort of exotic creature that we're looked at, with our work. I remember early on in my career, I was touring when they used to tour us all the time, and I was touring. I was doing a radio show, and one of the callers, a Black person actually, called in and, said that the talking about my particular book, that Black people don't live like that. And it was a story about, relatively well-to-do Black folks that happen to live in California. And they could not wrap their minds around the fact that there are Black people like that out there. And this is our own folks. So if it was coming from us, you imagine, how difficult it was, in the industry as a whole. So a lot of those doors got opened and, things are the way they are now. So when we see Black books all over the place, it's relatively a new phenomenon, actually, like a good 10, 15 years. It's a new thing because we weren't always there.
Yeah, I know that, that rings true because I know, I was interviewing another author who's a children's book author, and I was thanking her for being a children's book author because, I was telling her, it's like when I was growing up, I got the Dr. Seuss books, Where the Wild Things Are, those sorts of books, but there weren't any children's books that had, people like me, on the cover. And even when I got to high school, it was difficult actually impossible for the librarian to find a high school age young adult book for a black boy. They just weren't around, at least not in great abundance anyway. So, and it's interesting, how, we're changing that so that, those myths can be debunked and, we can get forward with saying, hey, we are a people that tell story. We are a people that have been writing, long before we came to the shores of America, So, I think that's important for us to continue to do. Let me ask you this. This is a writer's question for you. Best compliment that a reader has ever given you?
Wow, that's a tough one. I think this kind of shocked me. This was probably about 15 years ago. I wrote this book called, I don't even know if it was that long, maybe 10 years ago. It was called If I Could. And it was all about this woman who decided that the status quo of her life was not going to be her life anymore. And if that meant leaving her husband, leaving the job that was unfulfilling, that's what she was going to do. And, you write your books and, you hope that people enjoy them, et cetera. And I got a letter from a woman who said that reading the book gave her the courage to leave a bad marriage. I was like, whoa, okay. I didn't tell you to leave your husband, but, so things like that. And then there was another book in my bedroom, which was really about, a woman dealing with sexual trauma. Not to give the whole story away, but I was at a book signing. I don't even know where I was, somewhere in the South, I believe. Maybe it was Atlanta. And a woman came up to me and she said, this happened to me. And that same book was so well researched, I was told, that it was actually used in a sociology class. So, yeah, just dealing with what happens when memories are repressed. So that was a large part of the story. So things like that, as I said, you just really never know what kind of impact your story is going to have on people, what element might resonate, things that readers see that you as the writer, never saw yourself. So those are just a couple of things that have been told to me.
Okay. All right. Wonderful. Now I have another, writer educator question, I guess, that came to me. So we both went to Goddard College and we both attended that particular educational institution as already published authors. I know what I got out of the program, with, being a published writer and then going back to learn more, about the craft of writing. So I wanted to ask you, with your experience with the writing program, how did you change, or how did your writing change, or your perception of writing change after you went through the program? Because a lot of people may think that, oh, you're a writer, you're already a professional. Why would you go back and get more education in an area that you've already proven that you're excellent in? So what did you get out of the program? What did you get out of the continuing education of learning the craft?
That's a really good question because you probably had the same uh, moderator. I can't think of the word for it. That I did, Jan, and when I was talking with her in our initial meeting, she asked me that very same question, like, you've been published for, I don't know, whatever it was at that time, like, 15 years, almost 20 years. Why are you doing this? And, I told her I want to learn how to write differently. And so she asked me what kind of writer was I? And I told her, I write very linearly. I write from beginning to end. I just can't not do that. And so my challenge was to not do that, to learn how to write differently, to learn how to craft scenes and circumstances independent of the arc of the story. And in doing that, I was able to put together my graduate thesis that was a series of vignettes that told the story of this family. And pieces of my thesis are actually in this new book as well. What it also taught me, it opened me up to a world of literature that I probably would not have endeavored to read on my own. Different styles of writing, different ways to approach things. I learned how to analyze text, to look for meaning between the lines of literature. So I feel that I've gotten to a point where as I write and as I teach, I can reach back to all of the wealth of examples that I came across, that I can see, parallels in different stories. I can see how a writer, used, reframed a Toni Morrison scene. I understood the power of symbolism. So all of those things, helped me, I think, to be a more thoughtful writer, and ultimately to be a teacher of writing, which was my ultimate goal also for going back to school, because I knew that I was at the point in my writing career that I wanted to teach. I wanted to be able to share, my love of literature. And I knew that I wanted to do it on a college level. And the only way that I could do that was with a master's degree. So I had to, I went back to school. That was one of the other reasons that I went as well. And came out on the other side, and I've been, able to teach ever since.
Yeah, you and I went back both for the same things. I wanted to learn how to be a better writer, as also become a teacher to teach the art and craft of writing. That college is such a unique place. I had never been in an environment like that where you are surrounded by writers, where everybody's there working on a project.
Yes.
And you're in a community of writers. You're in a community of creatives. And it was an environment where everybody got my madness, because not everybody gets the madness of writing because it's such an alone event. And you are spending an awful lot of time in your head, in that imaginary space, and, trying to, give birth to the words that paint the pictures that are in your mind very well. And then to go back and study other writers in a way that I've never studied them before. I think Jan was our our advisor.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And so one of the things that I learned through her was to read the world. And I had never heard of that concept before because I was like, oh, I read all the time. And I was like, yeah, but you may only be reading American authors. So they opened me up to reading other authors from around the world. And suddenly I realized, oh my God, I can't write. What have I been writing? What have I been writing? I wanted to go back and unpublish everything that I published, say, no, I've done it wrong, or not done it wrong, but, I could tell that the way I write now and the way I think about the words I put on the page has matured quite a bit. And, and the way I read books has changed quite a bit. So it was just such a wonderful program, and I'm so glad, that I did it. So with that being said, we're going to move that behind us now, and I'm going to ask you another writer's question, and that I know this is one that I've often gotten, and so I'm going to give it to you as well. Does one of your main characters hold a special place in your heart, and if so, why?
God, there's so many of them. Wow. Let's see. I would probably. Okay, so I want to break it up a little bit. So because I sort of straddle the fence between romances and women's fiction, and I would say in terms of romances, traditional romances, Quentin Parker is probably one of my favorite characters. So he wound up in a series. For my women's fiction, I would say Asha from An Ordinary Woman. Story-wise, I would have to say it's a tie between Rhythms and Confessions in B flat because of the depth and the wealth of information and story texture that went into crafting those two books, both of which were, period pieces. So that's a long answer to a very short question.
That's fine. And so since you've brought up Confessions in B flat, and I've read the book and got to narrate the book, and I enjoyed the book. I mean, I think I read that book in a day and a half because I started it one evening and then I woke up the next day and I got my cup of tea, I got my blanket, and I sat on the couch with my dog. And we read, and we read that book in that one sitting. And I got to the point in that particular story where I did not want it to end. And then when I got to give voice to it and narrate it, I really didn't want it to end because Confessions in the B flat, as you said, is a period piece, but you are really pulled into that era of the 1960s. And you really feel like you are there with these two characters, Anita and Jason, in this book. There were times where I felt, well, I guess because I was narrating it, that I felt like they were right in the room with me. Like, I could see these characters so well, and I knew them so well, not only because of the way you crafted them, but parts of myself. I could see parts of myself in these characters as they were going through, these different stages of this relationship they were trying to forge. So I'm going to ask you, what was the inspiration for this book, Confessions in B flat?
Well, it sort of evolved over probably about a decade, to be honest. I had, some sort of, artistic flash in my head one day, B flat, you know. And I was like, that sounds like maybe it's an apartment, you know, apartment B. And I thought that it could be a place where people from the community come and, you know, kind of like chop it up on Friday nights and, you know, they kind of hang out. And I kind of had that sort of hanging in the back of my head for a very long time. And it just kind of sat there. And, you know, then I went to grad school and, you know, got the degree and I did the thesis. And, you know, there was a storyline that I had worked on and kind of left by the wayside, that there was, you know, an idea for a twist on the trope of Romeo and Juliet, and the family strife, and that was what divided them, and lovers torn apart, etc. So that sort of dropped into the B flat, and pieces from my thesis. Those characters to me were so very rich and nuanced. I wanted to be able to use them. So how could I do that? And so they became the parents in the novel. And so as I started thinking about, you know, who these people were going to be, for me, the 60s was my life. You know, I grew up during that time, you know, was nurtured on Motown and R&B and, you know, the Apollo and going to Harlem when Harlem was black and all of that. And so it was sort of like in the fabric of my being. So I knew that that was a time that I wanted to chronicle. And so slowly the concept for the novel began to take shape in my head. And, you know, I started working out the outline of what the story would entail. And I went back to my original inspirational moment of people coming together and, you know, talking and telling stories, etc. And I was like, Confessions in B flat. And so the title is the location of the club that Anita does her spoken word. So all of those little things, bit by bit, came together over a period of years and years and years until, you know, I finally saw it as a whole piece, probably about 2017 or so, 2018, and started shopping it around. And, you know, got good feedback. The version that ultimately came out was not what I originally submitted. It was closer to the form of my thesis in terms of, you know, language and development. And then, you know, it shaped to become a little bit more commercial. And that's kind of like how it happened. It was, you know, a process. I didn't just sit down one day and say, oh, you know, this is what I want to write about. You know, things came to me in fits and starts until I had a whole picture of what it was that I wanted to do. And then once I decided that this was the time period and this was the trope that was going to be used and this was the location, you know, I had to begin to frame out what was going to happen during the window of time that I wanted the story to take place between 63 and 68, I believe. Yeah.
Now, the interesting thing with that, you know, this did feel like, as I was reading, a story that although it went from 63 to 68, it feels like it went longer than that, just with all of the history that's intermingled into the story that took place during that time. And also you mentioned, you know, the music, you know, that you grew up on and the music that you know, listened to, and ultimately some of the, you know, song titles that made it into the story. Because I can tell you, as I was as I was reading it, there was one point where, there's a mention of Marvin Gaye's song, Can I Get a Witness? And I was like, oh, man, I haven't heard that song in a while. So I turned back a few pages. I literally turned back a few pages and then played Marvin Gaye, Can I Get a Witness? As I was, drinking my tea, sipping my tea and reading the book, just so that I could feel like I was in the room with them. That I was in the room with the characters, and and then there were times where the song would switch, and then I would say, oh, I gotta play DJ now, and I gotta switch the song, and I would switch the song to a jazz song that you mentioned in the book. I was like, oh, yeah, I'm feeling this. I mean, the book just had that sort of there are books that you read for pleasure. There's books that you read for knowledge, but then this book you bought it comes to life because you feel it. And you just like, that music, just like, yeah, I feel this moment that this author is writing about. I'm in this moment that this author is writing about. And it feels good to be in this moment. And although I was not the love interest in the story, it was like I was just sitting back watching, being an interloper of sorts. And enjoying my guilty pleasure of being an interloper with these two characters in their moment. Let me ask you this, and this may be an obvious question, but when you write, do you often listen to music? Or when you write, what is your process? Do you have to go out to the shed, go up to the attic? Do you have to go sit in the car? What's your process like? And do you listen to music when you write?
I tell you, the older I get, the less distractions I can deal with. It's so funny when I first started writing, I could stay up. I would write until, the sun came up, get up and go to work afterwards. I'd have music playing in the background and, all kinds of stuff. But I've learned to, since early on, learn to write in the middle of whatever. And I just my brain kind of got trained that way. So I can be, grading papers one minute and, I'll switch over and, start writing a scene from the book or, pick up where I left off. Teaching, I do writers workshops in addition to, teaching English courses. And so, I always tell students, especially when they first get started, have some sort of process, try to write every day or whatever. And so everybody has to do what works for them. And, I will tell writers in a minute, don't do what I do because I'm very chaotic in terms of, writing. I do not need some quiet space. I don't need, candles, scented candles and a bottle of wine. I can't go up to the cabin or anything like that. I've always worked in the middle of whatever was going on. Sometimes I'd be at work and I'd be in my office and, close the door and I'd start working. And it can be anywhere. It can be anytime. I don't wait for inspiration. So that's never been an issue for me, in terms of, writer's block and, I can't figure out what I'm going to say or what I'm going to do or where the next idea is coming from. So none of that has really ever been, an issue for me. But, and sometimes, they always say, you should try to write every day. I may not be writing my book every day, but I'm writing something every day. And if I'm not writing, then I'm reading. Between, student papers or, listening to audiobooks or, reading a new novel. So that creative part is always active. Even if I have to put it, compartmentalize it and put it to the side so I can get other things done. But, the writing is always, it's always there. It's like a part of who I am. And, I just finished another book a few weeks ago and sent it in. And so all of a sudden, I wasn't working on a project. And I was like, oh my God, I felt like something was wrong with me because I didn't have enough stuff to do in the course of a day. So I'm actually, in the middle of starting to work on something else now. But, it was a weird feeling because there's always something, always some writing project that, that's going on. If I'm not working on it, then I'm editing it or something. And so I had that momentary pause, and it was like, oh God, like, what are you doing? Are you slacking off? Like, why aren't you producing something? So I, to answer your question, I don't have a process per se. I know for a fact that I'm not particularly a morning person. So I don't function well in the morning. I don't do morning classes. I don't do anything other than like maybe watch the news and drink coffee in the morning. So I usually get in gear, sometime around noon, and then I can start, thinking and processing. And I can work, like late into the night, not as late as I used to. But that's kind of me, kind of chaotic and, just get it done.
Yeah. It's funny because as you were talking, I was thinking like, man, I got up at 3 a.m. this morning and I wrote some poetry. And then after,
oh no.
Oh yeah. And then after I wrote it, I recorded it. And and so then I was like, oh, this is just a little piece of something. So I put out a little clip of it. And boy, I have gotten some, a lot of positive feedback on it. And I was like, yeah, that's that 3 a.m., voice waking me up saying, you need to write this, And so I'm definitely a morning person because, during the day, my mind gets so flooded with other things that it can't think. But when I start off first thing, fresh in the morning, with a clear mind, it's a great thing. And I listen to music, but usually I listen to like sounds of nature or something like that to, get me in a particular creative space. And music really helps, especially like, weird sounds or something like that. I think they call it synesthesia or something like that, where where music, helps to spark creativity of some sort. And, that has always worked for me to get me into that moment. So, it's always interesting for me to hear other writers' processes. And like you, when I teach my students, I teach them, some of the same principles that you mentioned, like, don't be like me. My madness may not fit for you. And, take your time. And I always tell them that writing is a process. It's a marathon and not a sprint.
Absolutely.
Is what I tell them. Real quickly, you sounds like you're like me. You're always reading. Like right now, the book that I'm reading is called Caste: The Origins of Our Discontent.
Yes.
Oh my God. I have to sip that book. I have to sip it. Because I can't just, go and drink it. I have to sip it, but it is so filled with fascinating information that is relevant, for what we're going through at least here in the United States today. So with that said, I want to ask you, what book is on your shelf now, or what book is in your lap or on your nightstand that you're reading now?
I'm actually between two books at the moment. I am reading, I'm listening to, because that's what I've been doing recently, is actually doing audiobooks. So I'm listening to Barack Obama's book, A Promised Land.
Wait real quick, how is it? Because I haven't downloaded it yet and I want to download it.
It is excellent.
Okay.
How he was able to survive 8 years under the duress that he was under is a master miracle. I have like a renewed, appreciation for this man and what he tried to do. And the obstacles, that he had to face in order to just do what he did, and so many of us don't even realize, the policies that he was able to put through. We just think of, the healthcare system. That's his big signature thing. But so many other things that that he was able to do, while he was in office. So it's very enlightening. And then today, Bernice McFadden actually told me about this book. It's called Mediocre, and it's all about how our society has been formed and sustained and led by mediocre white men, and what all of that means to us. So I just started that yesterday. And before that, what was I reading? I finished. I was a little late to the game. Americana. That was fabulous. And it was the narration was just incredible. So I really enjoyed that. What else did I read? I read The Vanishing Half. And what else did I? Where the Crawdads Sing. So those are the ones that I've read most recently, and Cass. Yeah.
So Obama's book is the next one on my list. I'm finishing up Cast. And then, I've read so many, before then. There was another one that was by an author from South America, and it was American Dirt is the one that is the one that I read before that. So and of course now reading the books that I narrate. So I'm reading a book by Timothy McCain now called Divorcing Atlanta that I'm set to narrate. So yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And then what's the other one? The Other Westmore I read and narrated. Another one was called Chasing Space about a black astronaut that I read and narrated. So, I stay with the book in front of me. And speaking of that, why don't we take a moment now to listen to an excerpt from Confessions in B Flat?
Okay.
While he worked, he took the opportunity to watch the comings and goings on the street, sharing greetings with the array of folks who came and went. There were parents pushing baby carriages, delivery men, toddlers with grandparents, students on their way to Columbia University, not too far away, and a cluster of young men who hung on the corner, smoking cigarettes and swapping stories about their sports heroes' latest feats. He smiled. How many corners had he and Jeff hung out on, just shooting the breeze and enjoying life? He wiped the perspiration from his head with his forearm, gathered up his cleaning supplies, and was headed back inside when he glanced up and stopped short. His heart raced. She was coming across the street. He'd only seen her once, but he'd know that halo of hair and that face anywhere. As she drew closer, he watched as her expression changed from determination to shock. She tipped her head a bit to the side, squinted with a half smile on her face. Anita stopped in front of him, adjusted her tote higher up on her shoulder, and stuck her hands in her back pockets of her capri pants. Do-gooder! I'll be damned! And welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that excerpt from Confessions in B Flat by USA Today bestselling author Donna Hill, who's here talking to us about the book. So Donna, in that scene, we see Jason doing some work around the center that he's trying to open up to help spread the word of Dr. King. And then he sees Anita. And there's a particular line that I want to talk about to see if I get some information out of you. He says he would know that halo of hair. I just love that line, that halo of hair anywhere. And I know that for Black women, your hair can be your crown. Why did you give Anita such a halo of hair?
I wanted her to, symbolize so much more. Her hair is symbolic of revolution, and power, and not backing down. The afro or the fro back then was very symbolic of Black people coming into their own, standing in their truth. It was a sign of pride and defiance of a system. And so it was important that was one of her attributes, was her hair. This vibrant halo of hair that surrounded, her face. So that's like her signature.
Yeah, and it was a signature because I just loved how Jason loved her hair. He talked about the fire and fury.
Yeah.
That was absolutely wonderful. Well, Donna, it has been a pleasure talking to you. But before we start signing off, why don't you let the readers know where they can get your books, how they can get in touch with you? Let's get your social media information.
Well, let's see. I'm on Facebook. You can find me at Donna Hill Writer or Donna Hill Fans. That's my fan page. Those are both on Facebook. I'm on Twitter at Donna Hill. And, I'm finding my way around Instagram. I'm trying to catch up with everybody else. So I have the Instagram page. It's Brooklyn Girl 737. So those are the spaces where you can find me. For professional folks, I'm on LinkedIn. So I hop over there periodically. And so that's kind of like where I am. My website is donnaohill.com. You can jump over there and see what's going on. I try to keep it as current as possible. But I'm always on Facebook. You can always catch me over there. I'm always over there trying to see what's going on and getting into everybody's business, so.
Wonderful. And where can people get your books? And real quickly, how many books have you written and where can people get them?
Oh, wow. Somebody asked me to do a count the other day. I think altogether, it's close to 100 titles in print. I think it's like 65 novels, single title novels, 62, 65. And then all of the collections. You can find me in any bookstore. You can get any of my books off Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, AALBC, Troy Johnson's website, Black bookstores, definitely, Mahogany Books in DC. So I'm all over the place.
Okay. And for those of you who are outside the U.S., Amazon is probably going to be the best place for you to find a good Donna Hill book if you don't have Barnes and Nobles or anything in your part or in your neck of the woods.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Donna, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us here on A Reader's Paradise.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I just got to give, before we go, I just want to let everybody know that if you are into audiobooks, definitely get the audio version of Confessions in B-Flat because our very own Earl Sewell does the narration and it's just totally fabulous. Listening to your own words come to life is truly an experience and he did a wonderful job. So thank you very much for that, Earl. I will always be indebted to you for that.
Thank you for giving me the chance to, nurture your baby. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I'm glad that you like the performance of the book. So with that being said, folks, stick around and take a listen to an excerpt from Lenny Gray and Manhunt. Until next time, happy reading. I've been listening to the radio," Willie said. "They talk a lot about black men going to the war as a way to prove that we are men. They say we got to fight for 2 victories, one against Hitler and one against Jim Crow." "Jim Crow ain't going nowhere. That much I can tell you," Curly said with conviction as he smeared away tears that had formed in the corner of his eyes. "Then why should I go fight for a country that don't treat me like I'm somebody? Why fight for a country that treat me real bad?" Willie asked. Again, Curly couldn't think of an answer and felt bad because he couldn't provide Willie with the wisdom that he was asking for. Curly could not give what he did not have, so he said, "Because that's just the way it is, son. I wish I had a better answer, but I don't. We ain't got no choice in this life. Things just happen, and as a man, well, you just gotta make do the best that you can." His shabby dwelling consisted of 3 musty rooms, all of which had soiled green shag carpet with matching wall paint. The paint on the walls had chipped and left jagged designs. White pipes from other apartments snaked across the ceiling of his unit like a complicated spiderweb. The pipes hissed constantly and sprung leaks wherever they saw fit. Luther entered the vestibule of the building and saw his electric bill on the floor with a shoe print on it.